to those of our relatives that have been in nursing homes over the last number of decades and liabilities that they did incur. So I think the main thing is that we get answers to the questions that deputies will have over the next couple of weeks. And obviously there's a debate next week in the Dáil, which is welcome. We have submitted correspondence to the Health Committee, which I'm a member of, to invite Stephen Donnelly and Robert Watt in relation to this issue. I think it's important also Shane Corr is invited into the Health Committee to explain the documentation that he has in relation to the quite kind of, I suppose, very, very serious matters in relation to liabilities that families have endured over the last number of decades and the kind of financial impact that had in relation to their situation. So obviously this is kind of an ongoing situation, and I think the Taoiseach, he had a correspondence in 2019 in relation to his, I suppose, his guidance over this, and I think he needs to make a statement in relation to his approach to this issue. So obviously this is an ongoing situation. It will be kind of teased out in the Chamber, the Health Committee, and correspondence that has been given to us in relation to Shane Corr's whistleblowing his correspondence thus far.
You want me to go now? Okay, so tomorrow is Lála Bríde, my day, and I've called for a protest over the question of gender-based domestic violence. We're all aware that the International Committee on the Istanbul Convention are currently here. They've been interviewing the Women's Council and other people who are part of the coalition on gender-based violence. And I mean, even before they came, what struck me was it's almost been one murder a week of a woman since the new year started, and we're more than a year since the killing of Aisling Murphy, and nothing has happened other than the government have produced a good strategy document, and we think there's lots of good things in it, but the problem with it is all actions on it will remain undone until at least 2024, and there are really dangerous situations out there, and this issue cannot wait. And we want to argue that in the meantime, before they create the agency, pass the legislation that they want to create a dedicated domestic violence agency, that they can do several things. One is to reform the school curriculum to start dealing with sex education and the toxic masculinity that children are exposed to in this society. And there's plenty of bills put forward that are lying there in the queue and not being dealt with. Meantime, the review of the curriculum is going ahead without any consideration given to the submissions made by the National Women's Council and other organisations. We want those submissions to be taken into account and their recommendations included in the review of the national curriculum. The second thing that they could be doing is to reform the family law courts. That does not require the agency to do that, but that needs to be acted on very, very urgently. And I think the government acknowledge that in their strategy, but everything has to wait, and women can't wait. And lastly, we need more refuge spaces. I mean, there's been loads of coverage in various media outlets and research done on this, and at least 8 families per day are being turned away because there's nowhere for them to go. Not just being turned away, but being turned back into the arms of their abusers. And this is totally unacceptable. And as I say, the commitments that were made after the tragic murder of Aisling Murphy, none of them have been acted on. We still have 9 counties without a single refuge space. And as I say, the figures of the numbers of women and children being turned away is absolutely breathtaking. So there are issues that they could be moving on, and we just cannot believe why they're so slow. So tomorrow there's going to be a gathering both to celebrate Lála Bríde, but also to say to the government, you have to act, you have to move. And the National Women's Council, the Students' Union and the Coalition on Domestic and Gender-Based Violence will all be here with us to really shout at the government to start acting now and stop waiting till more women are murdered.
I just want to say that I think we're in a very dangerous situation in this country now with the rise of far-right ideas, the rise of far-right organisation and the spread of very racist, divisive, hateful ideas. I think we are on a trajectory for someone being very seriously injured or killed. If you look at what happened at the weekend in terms of Ashtown, an attack on homeless, people who are legally in the country, people in a tent, attacked in what can only be understood as a racist an assault on them because of where they're coming from. Last night, allegedly, the burning down of a building that was supposedly going to be used either to house or to educate asylum seekers. If you look at what is happening on a nightly basis now in Finglas, whipped up by one far-right agitator in particular, it is extremely scary. And obviously there's a lot of attention about the threats to politicians and so on, and that's appropriate. But the truth is that the most likely person to get seriously hurt or injured or killed here is going to be a migrant, be they an asylum seeker or be they even an Irish person of colour who is walking by, a racist mob. And is set upon them. That is the trajectory of things. If anyone's paying any attention to what's being put out on social media by these far-right activists, that is where we're heading at a very, very quick speed. One thing I want to say is I think the government has real responsibility about this. They have responsibility for the housing crisis that they have caused, which is being used by the far right, with anger being misdirected away from the government, away from the corporate landlords, away from the private developers, to saying the problem is refugees, the problem is asylum seekers, which is absolutely not the case. If you look at the concrete case of Ashtown, if it wasn't for the government's failed housing strategy, people wouldn't have been living in tents, be they Irish, be they Polish, be they Syrian, be they from wherever. So the government has real responsibility for the social crises they've created in this country, which are being exploited in a very disgusting way and completely dishonestly by the far right. But secondly, they have responsibility for the rhetoric they themselves have engaged in, for the discrimination they're engaging in against non-Ukrainian asylum seekers at the moment. And they are putting people, over 50 so far, people who are fleeing war, persecution from Syria, from Yemen, they're putting those people on the streets because they're not Ukrainian, because they're not a European. That is contributing to a dehumanisation of them, and the government is also guilty. I've been on programmes myself with government representatives who have tried to blame the housing crisis on asylum seekers coming here, which the evidence does not back that up whatsoever. We obviously had a housing crisis well before the war in Ukraine. So there is a very, very serious situation taking place. We have come together, People for Profit, with many, many other groups, the Social Democrats, Dublin Council of Trade Unions, Lecala, lots and lots of anti-racist organisations have been working together in a coalition and are organising a major protest on Saturday, or a rally on Saturday the 18th of February, assembling at 1:30 at Parnell Square with a message of Ireland for all, taking up the For All groups, which has arisen right across the country, to say that Ireland should be a welcoming place for people who are fleeing from conflict, and that we also need to have homes for all, services for all, jobs for all, that all those things are possible. It's a question of how the resources in our society are used. So that's an attempt to create a pushback, because I think the vast majority of people in Ireland are horrified at what's taking place. It doesn't represent them, but we need that to come out and be mobilised in order to isolate and push back the racists and the far right who are attempting to divide people.
Questions?
Reece, can I just come back in on the need for a new curriculum or an updated curriculum? I just would question how good that may be if then schools can use ethics or religious ethos excuse not to actually implement that.
Yeah, well, obviously we agree with you that it can't be perfect if schools can use their ethos to override what should be there to undermine toxic masculinity and to develop children's understanding of consent and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So the bill we have waiting in the queue, I mentioned earlier on, would deal with that. It would not allow schools to have that opt-out clause. You'd have to implement this curriculum. But nevertheless, what's shocking about it is that the submission made from the coalition around domestic violence, which includes the National Women's Council, Women's Aid, etc., they made a very clear submission that's been ignored by the government in developing a new curriculum. They should take it on board and include it, instead of waiting for the agency to be created through legislation in 2024, and then the curriculum will already have been remoulded and the agency will not be able to have an input into it. So the way they're tackling this is absolutely appalling, and you would think that it's just a sort of a domestic add-on, but it's actually life and death of women, and we've seen it repeatedly. 13 women in this country killed last year, and 2 already in January. So, this ain't going away. And it's not just particular to Ireland, but it is very serious in this country and very serious in Northern Ireland as well. And I think it helps to undermine the really awful argument that is being made at the moment that men who come into this country who are unvetted, who seek asylum here, are the problem and they're a real threat to women and children. We have that threat to women and children already. It's at endemic levels in this country and has been for quite some time. But our problem is the government's delay in really trying to grapple with it and deal with the issues that are practical, that could be dealt with now, instead of waiting mañana till they get the legislation right.
One thing there. Just to mention a specific example which I raised in the Dáil last week about Templeogue College, which is a Spiritan-run school where a majority of staff have now signed a collective grievance which speaks about an oppressive atmosphere, an anti-LGBTQ atmosphere, where the principal took down a pride flag. A pride flag was hanging up. They took it down. The principal described being LGBTQ+ as a lifestyle choice, and it's an extremely inhospitable environment for teachers who are LGBTQ+, and obviously for students who see that. The fact that is happening in this day and age because of religious ethos and so on, they can hide behind that, say we're the Spiritans, is absolutely disgraceful.
Just on the health committee and what it intends to do about the nursing home issue, is that invitation actually going out to Robert Watt today?
Well, that'll be discussed at the private meeting at 4 o'clock, but I presume it will, because there's a number of slots in the next couple of weeks available for issues that arise, and I presume that invitation will have gone out after the private meeting at 4 o'clock.
Do you expect others to agree that Shane Corr should come in as well?
That's a bit more complicated, because there's a kind of variety of opinion in relation to members of the health committee, and also the legal advice that we've got from the Secretariat and so forth. But I will be kind of stating that I think Shane Corr should be invited, whether that's private to TDs, which does happen. It doesn't have to be in public. But I think in this situation, I would argue that Shane Corr's his correspondence in relation to this issue, I think it's in the public, good that it comes out in public sphere, such as the health committee. But whether that's granted, I don't know.
Your preference would be a public meeting?
I think so in this situation. Whether I can kind of win the argument, we'll see later on.
Do you know, will you be calling for the previous health ministers to come for the health committee to give testimony on this?
I think so. Particularly after 2011, there's been what I think 4 health ministers, Leo Varadkar being one of them, Simon Harris, and obviously Stephen Donnelly at the moment. But I think it's in the public interest that this is teased out in the health committee, that successive health ministers that would have seen this correspondence on their desk in some way deal with this issue and kind of tease out why they didn't deal with it and why this is ongoing in relation to families that were kind of that had to suffer kind of financial hardship in relation to public nursing homes and private nursing homes. It really it throws up more kind of questions than answers. That why was this allowed to happen, and why were families had to go through this kind of legal and kind of financial hardship in relation to their families.
Do you know, just if Shane Corr does give over all of the documents that he has, what more would he have to contribute in such a meeting? Could it actually work against a whistleblower being possibly examined by it?
It's possible, Elaine. That's obviously that's what we have to kind of discuss at the health committee today. I don't know if there's a precedent that a whistleblower is actually brought to a committee and is it's in public kind of the sphere. So, but I think in this case, I think it would be worthwhile. Whether that's it would be have a preference that it should be in public, but if it's in private, then it's in private because of other issues that are relate to legal issues and kind of issues relating to how the Health Committee actually kind of deals with issues that are related to whistleblowers. So I think that's probably the best way to deal with it, if that's probably a bit of a kind of opaque answer.
And just another follow-up, do you believe that the Health Committee is the best committee to deal with this and not PAC?
I think the Health Committee is probably the best vehicle for this issue, because it's a health related issue. Obviously it does kind of mire into PAC, but I think in this situation I think the Health Committee is probably the best placed committee to deal with this issue at this moment in time.
Peter, just on a totally separate note in relation to committee, how's that linked to the committee to investigate the future of assisted dying?
Yeah.
Move into the forefront of. What are your thoughts on the appointment of that committee, or how quickly would you like to get it now?
Well, hopefully the committee is set up very quickly. I know the chair has been appointed, and a number of TDs have been appointed also. The government TDs haven't. There also has to be a motion put to the Seanad in relation to their 5 members. So hopefully that happens very, very quickly, and the establishment of the Assisted Dying Committee can start very, very quickly in the next couple of weeks. It won't really, time really kind of starts when it meets in public, but I think it's really, really important that the committee gets established as soon as possible, because obviously this issue has been going on for a considerable amount of time. The Justice Committee made a recommendation over a year and a half ago to set this committee up, and still no committee. So I think it's time to have that frank and open debate about a very kind of complicated issue. Even though a person that would fully support the issue of assisted dying, I think we have to kind of discuss the whole broad spectrum of a very complicated issue that, you know, I would hope that it would be legislated in the time frame of this government.
Even with no disrespect to the chair who's been appointed, the Rural Independent Group and Deputy Healy Rae would be known for their very permissive or liberal approach to social issues like this. Do you have any concerns that might colour the work of the committee?
I don't think so. You know, I spoke to Michael last week and we had a good discussion, and he says, look, he has his views about assisted dying. I respect that view. He respects my view, and I think he's going to be a kind of hopefully he's the fair chair. I mean, the discussion that I had with him, he said he wants to, obviously it's a very important issue, and he will be as fair as possible in relation to the full broad spectrum of this issue. So I take his word on that.